Everybody, welcome back to the NC State Insider Podcast. I'm your host and lead beat writer for NC State on SI, Tucker Sennett, joining you here from Charlotte, North Carolina tonight after the second day of ACC tip-off for the women's and men's basketball seasons. Uh, if you're not familiar with ACC tip-off, that is sort of your media day events for the ACC. And both the NC State men's and women's programs will be and have been down here in Charlotte. Westmore and the women's program were here yesterday talking about NC State women's basketball, and Will Wade will be here tomorrow to talk men's basketball. So I figured I'd just give you some of my expectations for tomorrow and Will Wade, some of my takeaways from today, and what went down today, and some of my takeaways from Westmore and the women's program yesterday and what they had to say. So let's dive in. How about it? Let's handle the yesterday before we get into anything else. So Westmore was down here. They seemed like a confident bunch despite being a pretty new team. A lot of youngsters that he's a little bit worried about in terms of NC State's success on the women's basketball court has been more veteran laden, if that makes sense, rather than younger teams. So he's going to be working with a new, younger squad, not a lot of returners, relying on some people to take the next step. And I still think that there's a lot of reasons to be confident in Westmore and this program. He's a coach that has proven he can be a consistent contender in the ACC, but the conference is really strong for women's basketball this year. You got a very good Duke team under Kara Lawson, the new head coach of USA women's basketball. You obviously are going to have your usual suspects in Louisville and Notre Dame. So it'll be interesting to see how Westmore performs against those teams, but they will have a new challenge that they haven't faced in the past, in addition to their really difficult non-conference schedule. The ACC women's basketball tournament is leaving the state of North Carolina. They're going to play that game in Atlanta, Georgia this year for the first time. Big deal in the NCC or in the ACC women's basketball world. This is a tournament that's been in Carolina for a really long time. I believe Commissioner Jim Phillips said 49 years today. So a major decision to move that. The commissioner said that the decision really came down to his belief that it's a pivotal moment in the growth of the sport of women's college basketball, and they need to find ways to grow the game, and there's no better time to do that than now. So they opened the tournament for bidding, and Atlanta came to them with a fantastic pitch, and they made the decision to roll with the tournament in the Peach State in Atlanta, and they're gonna do that. And I think, does it really affect NC State all that much? It's not like you're traveling across the country like those West Coast schools will be if they make the ACC tournament. It's just a different venue that they're not going to be as used to as they have been to the school or the areas in North Carolina that they've been. So I don't think that's going to have a major effect on NC State women's basketball. So that's your women's basketball update. Let's talk about today. Obviously, no NC State today, but I was here for the commissioners forum and some of NC State's rivals who talked. So I'll have a couple nuggets on that. But in terms of what the commissioner had to say and how those things might affect NC State, here's an interesting thing. The availability reports that some of the football coaches like Dave Doran that have sort of resisted injury reporting in the past have had to cope with this football season. They're coming to basketball too. New world. The details on those are on some of our stories and on my Twitter. You can find those. But basically, it's the same setup, just a little bit more expedited in terms of times. And those are only going to be in effect for conference games, so that won't be something we see until late December, early January. So we'll have more on that as we get closer to the season starting. and I'll break that system down a little bit later. The 18 game conference schedule is sort of a source of controversy because it's taken away some of those regular home and away rivalries. Like NC State doesn't play Duke and North Carolina at Duke and North Carolina, but they do host the Tar Heels and the Blue Devils at the Lenovo Center this season. Some fans and media members are a little bit upset about that because it sort of devalues the rivalry because those games are always very passionate and the fan bases don't necessarily want to travel from one to the other because like you're not it's actually good for the Duke fan base because it'll probably be a little, I mean, it might not be easy to get tickets, but it's a bigger venue than Cameron Indoor. So an interesting dynamic there. It just kind of limits the exposure of those really exciting and historic rivalries that are important to the history and the fabric of the ACC in terms of the triangle kind of being the face of ACC basketball in terms of the Carolina schools and Duke. And um, that's something that they considered and I guess, Duke and Carolina's rivalry is considered more important in a lot of ways, which is fair. That is kind of the rivalry in college basketball that a lot of people think of when they think of college basketball. And that rivalry was deemed more worthy of the home and away consistently than the NC State and Duke NC State rivalries. So we shall see how that works out. But really what Philip said it came down to is giving the member schools a better chance at the ACC tournament. He feels that the value of the ACC brand has diminished in the past couple of years, even though he truly believes that it is the premier college basketball conference. And with NC State pushing and trending in the right direction, he could be right in terms of the brand and the value of the conference as a whole. Things could be improving in the ACC, but we have to see it on the court happen and have NC State and North Carolina and Duke and maybe a couple other programs become consistent teams, maybe a Louisville, maybe a Syracuse returns to form and becomes that team that I think many expected them to be when they joined the ACC. You got to have more than two teams that are consistent, and that's just not there right now. But if NC State can become that third strong program, then the ACC could be back to what it once was, one of the country's most intense, notable conferences. And apparently, Phillips consulted with experts, I say in air quotes, like Jerry Palm, bracketologist guys, and not guys like Kenneth Pomeroy or Brett Torvik, who, are more analytic based and the experts. And I think there's a lot of skepticism about bracketologists at that level these days because a lot of them are a little bit older. They are established, but the world of college basketball has changed so much in terms of statistics and strength of schedule and just being able to consume that much basketball to assemble a bracket is really hard for guys like that are expected to do it on a weekly basis during the season and not use they're not as inclined to use some of the resources that some of these other guys do. And I think there's a perfect world where it's a blend of kind of that old school vibe and the current analytical trends and that just hasn't happened yet. But Phillips seems to think that those guys had the right idea in terms of cutting the conference schedule down to 18 games. We'll see. I don't think an extra non-conference game that some teams are just going to schedule another bye game. I don't think that improves your tournament stock all that much. Obviously it gives scheduling windows a little bit more freedom, but I don't see it making the change that I think Jim Phillips thinks it's going to. Uh, the increase in scholarships coming, or that's happened with the SCORE Act and the revenue sharing stuff seems to be a win for the conference and for its institutions and for NC State. I think we're seeing some good things there. So that's kind of my takeaway from the commissioner. As for my expectations for tomorrow, Will Wade's coming, obviously. He's the head coach. He'll be bringing Texas Tech transfer Darion Williams and North Carolina transfer Van Allen Lubin. Lubin did not come up today in the North Carolina portion of today's media availability. Um, Hubert Davis was asked about Will Wade being in the backyard and some of the juice with that program, and he was pretty mum. Didn't you know didn't stir the pot like I think Will Wade might tomorrow. He has a tendency to say things that are calculated and I think he believes that his team could be one of the best in the conference, and that's going to require him to beat these other two teams in the triangle. And I, there's no reason to think that with the talent that they have that they can at least compete with those other two if all kind of clicks like the way that he thinks it's going to click, which he's a confident guy, but he's also a really smart guy. And I don't think he would be talking like this if he wasn't pretty convinced that this team's going to be very competitive. Should get a better feeling about two of the other major rivals for NC State in the conference tomorrow, maybe three. Um, you know, Virginia's a little bit of a wild card. They're kind of my maybe, but I think Ryan Odom is one of the hottest young. He's been around a while now, but newer coaches in the power conferences coming over from VCU at UVA. We'll get Shire tomorrow. Be interested to see what his confidence level is about Duke. Obviously they're going to be a contender, but they lost a lot. So it'll be interesting to see what he says about who they have this year and what that roster looks like. And then Pat Kelsey in Louisville, they're kind of a trendy pick to win the conference. So uh, we'll hear from him as well. And that's kind of all I got. I'll obviously have more in the coming days as we get ready for NC State's trip to South Bend. We'll talk about that on the football field as we get closer to Saturday. But a lot of basketball stuff this week. Sorry if you don't like basketball, but that's how it's going to be. And as always, you can find content on our website, on my social media at Senate Tucker on X, the website's social media at Wolfpack on SI, and you can find daily episodes of the NC State Insider Podcast on the sports videos on SI YouTube channel. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm hoping to get one of these out after I get home in Raleigh from Charlotte here, and we'll talk some hoops later.